A very good morning to my dear students. Once again, welcome back to 7th grade English class. So, we have almost completed 4 units in our course book. So, here we are again going back to our literary reader, literature text. Yes, we completed the first 2 chapters in your literary reader. And now, today, we are moving with the third chapter in your literary reader. It's a beautiful story written by George Eliot. So, now, before going into the story, let us have an idea about the author. Have you heard about George Eliot? Or have you read her novels or any piece of writing? Tell me yes or no. Anyway, let us have a look at the writer. Okay. Actually, George Eliot is not the writer's exact name. It is actually her pen name. And what do you mean by pen name? P-E-N-N-A-M-E, pen name. You might have an idea about what pen name is. Yeah, we all know that poets are usually and generally known by their pen name. So, likewise, George Eliot is actually the pen name of Mary Ann Evans. So, Mary Ann Evans is her actual name, and nobody knows her in this name. The whole literature world knows her as George Eliot because, yeah, in writings she used this name, her pen name, as George Eliot. Okay, so George Eliot or Mary Ann Evans is a very famous novelist, poet, journalist, and she is primarily known as a leading writer of the Victorian era. So, Victorian era is a particular period in English literature, especially marked by the reign of Queen Victoria. So, she is regarded as one of the popular writer, or she is regarded as one of the famous writers in the Victorian period. And she is also famous for the psychological depth her writings are known for. So, if you closely analyze all her writings, you could find a psychological connotation. So is with in this story also. If you get into the roots of this story, yeah, we could definitely find really a psychological insight or a psychological knot or a psychological connotation. So that is actually her trademark. Okay. Anyway, now let us have an overall idea about the characters in the story. Shall we move? Shall we move to discuss the characters? So, these are the main characters in the story. Yes, how many characters are there in the story? Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, totally we have 6 characters in the story. And who are they? Yeah, we have Uncle Glug, Aunt Glug, Mrs. Tulliver, Mr. Tulliver, Tom, Maggie. So Maggie is actually the central character of the story. Yeah, one could easily find that Maggie is the central character of the story because the story is entitled in the name of whom? In the name of Maggie. Yeah, the name of the story is Maggie Cuts Her Hair. So, from the story, from the title itself, yeah, we could easily understand that the prominence is given to whom? Is given to Maggie. So, we could, or one could easily understand that, yeah, definitely the protagonist or the central characters would be whom? Would be Maggie. Okay. So, now let us have a detailed look into the traits of these characters. So, we have to know more about these characters, then only we would be able to understand the story in a better way. So, let us allot the remaining time to discuss each and every characters in its subtle manner or in its detailed manner. Okay. So here comes the first character, Uncle Glug. As I described here, Uncle Glug is sympathetic and whose words are intended to soften his wife's criticism. I don't know whether you are able to understand the second aspect of his trait, that whose words are intended to soften his wife's criticism. Anyway, you have to keep that particular trait in your mind. Okay, that would be better understood once we entered into the story. So, before that, understand that Aunt Gluck is a particular type of character, and she always makes hurting comments on others. So, on such occasions, Uncle Glug is always there to soften his wife's criticism. See, for example, imagine that if Aunt Gluck made a particular comment about you, and that would definitely hurt you, and in such occasions, yeah, her husband, Uncle Glug, would be there to soften your feelings. Okay, so that is actually the particular trait of character as mentioned here. Okay, I hope now you understood. Okay, now here comes the second character, Aunt Gluck. So we have already, yeah, you have already an idea about what kind of a character Aunt Gluck would be. Okay, so Aunt Gluck is harsh, judgmental, and unforgiving. Yeah, that is what I just made. I just mentioned that she is a particular type of character. She is a reserved type of character. So she is very harsh, then very rude to other people, and she is very judgmental. Okay. So here comes the next character, Mrs. Tolliver. Mrs. Tolliver is actually the wife of Mr. Tolliver. So as I described here, Mrs. Tolliver is always worried about her relatives' approval about her daughter. So Maggie is actually the daughter of Mrs. Tolliver. So Mrs. Tolliver is always worried about her relatives' approval about her daughter, and always worried about how people or how other people would be looking at her family, especially at her daughter Maggie. Okay, so this is actually the trait of Mrs. Tolliver. Then we have Mr. Tolliver. Mr. Tolliver, as I mentioned right now, is the husband of Mrs. Tolliver. Then Mr. Tolliver is very kind and affectionate, and uh, he is a doting father. What do you mean by doting father? Yeah, he is a very lovable father. He is a doting father. He is very affectionate and very kind to his children, to Tom and Maggie. Okay. Then we have Tom. Tom, as I mentioned here, is very affectionate and mischievous. So he is very kind and loving towards his sister, but is very mischievous. But you have to keep in mind that he is mischievous. Even though he is mischievous, his mischievous never let him to any trouble, or don't put him into any trouble. That means he is cunning, and he is mischievous in a positive way. Now we have the central character of the story, Maggie. Maggie, as I mentioned here, is an impulsive and sensitive girl with a will of her own, who loves her father and brother a lot. So Maggie wants to do and explore things by herself. She likes to do what she feels like doing, and she loves her brother and father a lot. Mostly because, yeah, that they are supportive to her, and not scold her like her mother does. Now it's better to have a clear understanding about the setting of the story. So the story starts when Maggie comes downstairs when her uncle and aunt comes to their home. Okay, so it is evidently seen that the story sets in Maggie's home, and Maggie and her entire family received Aunt and Mrs. and Mr. Glegg, and the story starts at that particular point when Mr. and Mrs. Glegg paid a visit to Maggie's home. Okay. Now let us move to discuss the story in detail. Now I hope that you get an idea about the story. Now listen, here I am going to read the story. So please listen. Maggie Cuts Her Hair by George Eliot. Maggie chops off her hair with her brother Tom's help in an act of rebellion. How does her family react when they find out? So, as we go through this preface portion, we could clearly understand one thing, and what is actually the main thing conveyed through this preface portion. Yeah, if you look at the preface portion, you can find two actions, or you can find two elements here. What are the elements you can find while you are reading this preface portion? Yeah, Maggie chops off her hair with her brother Tom's help in an act of rebellion. How does her family react when they find out? In the preface portion itself, the writer gives an outline to the story. The writer asks a particular question to us. And what is the question? Yeah, how does her family react when they find out? Yeah, Maggie chopped her hair. So, the entire story, we can find that the entire story is revolving around two questions: what and why. So, the entire story is revolving around two questions, what and why. What Maggie did and why Maggie did. So, what Maggie did here? Maggie chopped her hair. And why Maggie did? She did it in an act of rebellion. So, an outline about these two questions are given in the preface portion. That is what in the first sentence it is said about the action. Maggie, decides to chop off her hair with the help of her brother. And the second question has a paramount importance here. Then the writer asks to us that will it bring any problem, or how the entire family react to this act of rebellion. Okay. Anyway, now let us have a look at the story to know more details about the story. Okay. Now all of you please take page number 24 and look at the first paragraph. Here I am going to read the first paragraph. Listen. The Dodsons were certainly a handsome family, and Mrs. Glegg was not the least handsome of the sisters. As she sat in Mrs. Tulliver's armchair, no impartial observer could have denied that for a woman of 50 she had a very comely face and figure, though Tom and Maggie considered their Aunt Glegg as the type of ugliness. So, from the first paragraph itself, it is clearly understood that the story takes place in the Dodson family. The Dodson family is consisting of many brothers and sisters, and among those brothers and sisters, one pair is actually Maggie's parents and Mrs. and Mr. Glegg. Okay, and it is especially mentioned that Dodsons were a handsome family and Mrs. Glegg was not that much ugly among the sisters. Why it is said so? Tom and Maggie, who were the nephews of Mrs. Glegg, considered her as an ugly lady. So, the author, to our understanding, mentioned here that an impartial observer could never have denied that for a woman of 50, she had a comely face and figure. Comely, what do you mean by comely? Comely means beautiful. So, she had a beautiful face and figure. So, two things are here. You have to note two things here. Tom and Maggie were reserved about their aunt. And the other thing is that they were not an impartial observer on her beauty. And what might be the reason why Tom and Maggie were reserved about their aunt? That you all know, because we actually have a background idea about the story. I have already mentioned the character of Mrs. Glegg. Mrs. Glegg was actually a reserved character. When we discussed about her traits, we mentioned that she was judgmental, she was unforgiving, and she was harsh, and she always made what kind of comments? She always made hurting comments. So, perhaps it might be because of that reason Tom and Maggie were reserved about their Aunt Glegg. Okay. So now listen, here I am going to read the next paragraph. Listen. Heyday, said Aunt Glegg with loud emphasis. Do little boys and girls come into a room without taking notice of their uncles and aunts? That was not the way when I was a little girl. So, listen, this is what I mentioned right now. When Aunt Glegg saw Tom and Maggie for the first time after she arrived their house, the first thing the first thing she did, yeah, she found fault with whom? She found a fault with Maggie and Tom. And what she did, what she said, yeah, she said that, yeah, do little boys and girls come into a room without taking notice of their uncles and aunts? Oh, how this would be possible? How this would be counted as a good manner? Or how this would be fair? See, I'm your aunt and I just came to your home. And when I came to your home, how could you pass hereby without taking notice on us? So this is not an expected behavior from you people. And she added that, yeah, that was in the way when I was a little girl, when I was a young girl. Yeah, when I was a young girl during my childhood days, I would never behave like this. If I saw my parents, or if I saw my elders in that time when I was a child, I used to respect them. So in that way, Aunt Gluck found fault with the the behavior of Maggie. And here I have a I have a funny question to you. And what would be your response if such a grandmother or grandfather will be in your home? Will you love them, or will you have any soft corner towards them? No, we can't love them. Why? Yeah, because see, how could we love a person who always found fault with us? Yes. So the same thing happened here also, and Maggie and Tom were really fed up with this person. This really fed up with their aunt. So here I am going to read the next part. Please listen. Go and speak to your aunts and uncles, my dears, said Mrs. Tulliver, looking anxious and melancholy. She wanted to whisper to Maggie a command to go and have her hair brushed. So from this paragraph, the trait of Mrs. Tulliver is revealed. So we also we just mentioned the trait of Mrs. Tulliver, that Mrs. Tulliver always worried about how others would think of their family, or how others would think of their children. So when Mrs. Glegg made such a bad comment about Tom and Maggie, Mrs. Tulliver got upset. She became melancholic. So she wanted to whisper to Maggie a command to go and have her hair brushed. So Maggie's hair was in a very untidy position. So Mrs. Tulliver commanded or asked Maggie to go upstairs, to go and have her hair brushed. So make it in a tidy manner. Okay. So from this comment, it is clearly understood the trait of Mrs. Tulliver, that she was always worried about what others would think of their family, especially would think about her children, Maggie and Tom. Okay, now let us continue with the next part. I am going to read the next paragraph. Listen. Well, and how do you do? And I hope you are good children, are you? Said Aunt Glegg. Look up, Tom, look up. Boys as go to boarding schools should hold their heads up. Look at me now. Tom declined that pleasure apparently, for he tried to draw his hand away. So, after making a bad comment about Tom and Maggie immediately after she arrived their home, now Mrs. Glegg remarked that she thought that they were good children and urged Tom to look at her and hold his head straight and high, as boarding school students should hold their heads always straight and up. But Tom was not at all interested in such show off, so he neglected and tried to draw his hand away from Mrs. Glegg. Okay, so in that way he expressed her disinterest over Mrs. Glegg. Okay. Put your hair behind your ears, Maggie, and keep your frock on your shoulder. Then suddenly Mrs. Glegg turned to Maggie and gave her some instructions. She urged Maggie to put the hair behind her ears and to keep her frock on her shoulder. So, in that way, that is what I said in the beginning of this discussion, that Aunt Glegg or Mrs. Glegg was an authoritarian or judgmental. She judges every people, and she has a thought that she only knows everything, and she has the license to teach everyone, or she has the license to instruct everyone. So this kind of a person was she. Okay. Now listen. Aunt Glegg always spoke to them in this loud, emphatic way, as if she considered them deaf. I think the gel has too much hair. I would have it thinned and cut shorter, sister, if I was you. It isn't good for her health. Mrs. Glegg spoke them in an authoritarian style. She ruled them as if they didn't know anything. And when she saw Maggie's hair, she found fault with Maggie's hair, and she remarked to Mrs. Tulliver that long hair is not good for health. And she added that she would definitely cut it short if she was in Maggie's position. So, in that way, we can say to a great extent that Aunt Glegg or Mrs. Glegg was a sadist. She found the problem, she found fault with everything she saw. So, such kind of a character was Mrs. Glegg. Okay. Anyway, we can stop here. So, the remaining part of the story will be continued in the next class. Anyway, I hope that you understood everything which we discussed. Anyway, thank you. Have a nice day.